I don't think we've had a history of, for lack of a better term, yahoos getting on the BET.
Wait, I just mentioned Carol Becker, Steve. You're
Okay.
telling me we haven't had a history of yahoos?
She was much different when she was first elected. Let's put it that way.
We're rolling. This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
So I'm attempting to learn to ice skate as an adult here. I bought some ice skates. I've lived in Minnesota for a dozen years at this point, and I'm now deciding to learn to ice skate. It's very difficult.
You know, it's harder as an adult because you have a much more developed fear of falling. And I think when you're a kid, you have a lower center of gravity. I still do it. I love aisles. I ventured out to the loop at Maple Grove, which is a really cool place to skate in a city park there. And it's an oval, but it's a serpentine oval, so it goes in and out, all that sort of thing. And there's enough young kids there that you can feel right at home if you're learning to skate.
Yes. or you feel bad because all the kids are clearly beginners, but also so much better than what you're managing to pull off.
Well, that happens, you know. If I'd started my kid like at 6 instead of 8, he might have made the high school hockey team. But, you know, losing those 2 years makes a difference. I think that it's all in the weight transfer from one foot to the other. You have to have the confidence to stand on one foot for a split second before you shift to the other foot. Sort of like cross-country skiing.
Yeah, maybe I'll get it, or maybe I'll just give up. I'm going to introduce the show. This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. This is a taxation episode, and I'm calling my guest taxation sensation Steve Brandt, who is the one of 2 elected members of the Minneapolis Board of Estimate and Taxation. Welcome to the Wedge Live podcast.
Thank you, John.
Taxes are more of a hot button than issue, property taxes. And so I'll start with the very basic question that you probably get asked. Why are property taxes so high? Why have they increased so much?
Well, it's a function of a couple of things. The main thing is the amount the city spends. Another factor is how much the state government sends to Minneapolis to buffer the impact of property tax increases through local government aid. And that's been fairly static in recent years. It seems to me that one way to deal with the burden of property taxes is to find some other supplemental form of taxation, because the property tax is really hard on somebody who's in a situation where they're on a fixed income, particularly retired people. I'm lucky enough that I haven't, been pinched by them, but I've seen my bill go up quite a bit over the years. My house is now worth 12 times what I bought it for 48 years ago, so I've seen a big increase. Another factor is, of course, we're the oldest city in Hennepin County, essentially, and we have an old infrastructure, and that takes a lot of money to keep up. I believe in keeping it up. I served on the Capital Long Range Improvements Committee for 5 years, and we made recommendations on those investments. When you have sewer lines coming in or water lines that are coming in that date to the 1870s or 1860s, although they've had some maintenance over the years, it's an expensive lift to either supplement them with new pipes nearby or to reline them.
When I watch the local news and read the newspaper, you can have the impression, well, this is all a matter of like declining downtown tax base, the empty office towers downtown, declining revenue, and it's just a matter of that. But it's also a fact of like having to pay police officers more, having to pay public works employees more, like the cost to employ. The city is a large employer. The cost of that has gone up. Wages have gone up. Can you give people a sense of like where they should attribute this? Is it like half one thing, half another, mostly one thing and not so much another?
Well, keeping on the cost side for a minute, I should have also probably mentioned that because we're a big city and we're an older city, we have been unionized more thoroughly and longer than other cities. And there's a cost to that. I think it's a cost worth paying as a guy who's been a member of a union for 47 years now. And it means good working conditions for city employees, and that generally promotes a stable workforce. So that contributes. I would say that what we've seen in this particular year is a burden shift, a big burden shift. The impact of the downtown values but continuing to decline is really shifting the tax base, the burden of the tax base onto the remaining properties in Minneapolis. And for 2025 in particular, as well as 2024, we had the downtown property tax base imploding. It's not so bad anywhere else in the city. Actually, property values for commercial buildings went up elsewhere in the city, except for Uptown, which I'm hoping is a temporary situation. And then we also saw for apartments, the values of apartments went down substantially, like in the high single digits. And the reason for that is as the cost of borrowing got higher with the increase of interest rates, the interest in buying apartment buildings diminished. And so people who were selling buildings cut their prices. And so that leaves essentially home owners as the third major leg of the stool. And people who are homeowners also, we as a group saw our values go down, but only marginally, 1% or 2%. And because we went down less as a class, the residential class, compared to commercial and apartment, that means the burden shifts to us. And so that's why homeowners are seeing increases to a greater extent than the actual increase in the property levy, because some of the burden is shifting to them.
You've said in a second term, you are running for reelection in 2025. You'd like to get creative on reducing the city's dependence on property taxes to balance the budget. And so Elliot Payne has talked about this a little. Mayor Fry has said he wants to look at other taxes too. So it sounds like a lot of people are interested in this. What do you think is the best option there for an additional tax?
Before I address that specific question, I'd just like to say that I think I played a role in nudging the mayor and council president Payne in that direction.
You did originate it. Let's give Steve some credit. You were the first one to suggest this idea.
And actually, I conditioned my vote for the mayor's proposed levy this time around on a promise to give serious and sustained consideration of alternative sources of revenue. So what works best? I think the easy one, and this is relatively minor in the overall scheme of things, is to expand the downtown taxing zone for liquor and restaurants. And the easiest place to do that, and the most logical place to do that, is the North Loop. Right now, only about a third of the North Loop up to the railroad tracks, the Burlington Northern tracks, is within the downtown taxing zone. And yet there are restaurant owners and bar owners there who are having the same customers north of that line, and they're not having the same cost of doing business because of a line. And so I think the city is already on the case of trying to expand that. They tried to get it done last session. I think it was one of those things that, among many, that ran out of time at the legislature. But I think that's a real possibility. The question is, do you cut the rate or do you keep it where it was before as a adjustment? I would just as soon keep the rate where it is now. Then I think if you want to make a big impact, you need to look at income-based taxation, income or wealth-based taxation. And I see 3 possibilities there. I don't rank them all equally. One would be a wealth tax. In other words, how much wealth does a person or a household own. Another would be, and that's something that's been implemented, I believe, on a modified basis in Massachusetts or parts of Massachusetts. A second would be payroll tax on employers in the town. That has its pros and cons. Employers are already set up to collect various kinds of taxes for their employees when they do payroll. On the other hand, there is the question of, does it drive business out of town? And is it a big enough factor to drive business out of town? Then the third one, which I lean toward, but I want to have it thoroughly vetted, is income-based taxation of a sort. And I would propose implementing a very low income tax rate. I'm thinking in the vicinity of 1%, only on households that exceed $200,000 in income in Minneapolis. And that number is flexible. I'm not wedded to that, but it's more than 2 times the median household income in Minneapolis. So that seems to me like a reasonable figure to start the discussion at. Now, the issue, and I would point out that the Tax Foundation did a study, and they're a more conservative-leaning group, and found that about 5,000 jurisdictions, local cities and counties around the country, have some form of income-based taxation. And that's red states and blue states, surprisingly. What we have to look at there is, again, what is the impact going to be of imposing that tax? I mean, some people have already told a council member of my acquaintance that they would move if there was an income tax. Now, I don't know if they fully understand that it would be a low rate in a select number of households. That's something to look at the experience of other cities in and see what has been their experience. And if people leave, do other people move in behind them to occupy those same properties? What I'd like to see done with that money, which I estimate, just doing back of the envelope calculations, for the 24,000 households in Minneapolis that earn more than $200,000 annually, I calculate it could earn easily north of $40 million. That's a substantial sum, and I'd like to see that devoted toward 2 things. One is absorbing the property tax increase that would otherwise result from an increase in city spending, and city spending increases each year, just like our household spending does, or also probably targeted property tax relief to those who are most burdened. We do have a state circuit breaker income tax credit, which does give you money back if you have a tax bill that exceeds a certain percentage of your household income, typically aimed at the lower end of incomes. But I'd like to see if, perhaps we could supplement that. That might be an appropriate use. So there's a lot of unknowns here. I don't want to rush blindly into this. That's why I asked the mayor and the council president to give this some serious study. I wouldn't mind if they brought in some outside folks, say from the Federal Reserve or the university, and had another set of eyes on it. And so we know the pros and cons. We walk into it knowing the pros and cons.
You know what they're going to call you? They're going to call you Socialist Steve for suggesting this little income tax that you're talking about.
Well, then we live in a socialist state and a socialist federal government because they're already collecting income taxes. And socialist to me doesn't mean sharing resources. It means government ownership of the means of production, some of the means of production, and I'm not proposing that.
Right. There's a million variations of socialism. So I'm just joking. You're going to end up in an all of Minneapolis newsletter as Socialist Steve. You're going to be part of the DSA conspiracy.
If I could elaborate on that, I'm not a member of the DSA, and I try and maintain relationships on either side. I have already, when all of Minneapolis wrote a screed that targeted Councilmember Walmsley, with whom I don't necessarily agree on a lot, for introducing study of an income tax, I wrote a fairly spirited defense to the person who sent that out and said, look, if you're calling this a far left-wing thing, know that it's not only getting a look from this council member, it's getting a look from the council president, it's getting a look from Mayor Fry, who's hardly left-wing.
So a very technical question. If there was an income tax, I don't know how it works in other states. Is that going to give people another form that they need to fill out, or will it be like automatic when you file your state income taxes? Do you know how that works?
I don't claim to know the specifics, but the reason that many places have opted for an income tax is that people already do file income taxes, and you can use the state mechanism essentially to collect. I assume there would be a line on the form that says something on the order of if you live in Minneapolis, multiply the amount on the line that contains your adjusted gross income by X, and that's your additional tax that will then be remitted by the state to Minneapolis.
This sounds politically tricky. Like we've talked about how there's going to be opposition to it. People are going to threaten to leave. And so I feel like what a lot of local jurisdictions do is they fall back onto the idea of a sales tax. Like, well, that'll be easier. We can do that easier. Are you worried about that? Are you opposed to the idea of a sales tax, a local Minneapolis sales tax?
Well, of course, we do have a Minneapolis sales tax.
Right. It's over 9%. Are you worried that it will go higher?
I would rather not see it go higher because it's a regressive tax. Poor people spend more of their income on a sales tax than better off people economically. You're right, we do have a pretty high burden in Minneapolis of sales taxes. They do fund some things that are used by the entire region, and therefore it's appropriate to capture money from people who are coming in from outside of Minneapolis through lodging taxes and restaurant taxes and liquor taxes and admissions taxes and so on. I think I'd rather see those taxes increase than before the general sales tax.
I'm so glad that I got you to deny being a member of the DSA. People will be so excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was interested.
I have never been asked to join.
Yeah, come on, DSA. Why don't you ask Socialist Steve to join now that he's proposed this income tax? So I was interested to read this interest rate maneuver that you tried. I guess I don't watch BET meetings, so I missed this.
You've got a life.
Yes. The idea was you wanted to borrow funds while interest rates were low to pay for things and then move. It's a complicated maneuver, but can you explain why that failed? You say it failed by one vote. Like, what was the argument against that?
I think the chief argument against it was people were arguing that we didn't know what was going to happen with interest rates.
Okay.
I think it was fairly clear what was going to happen with interest rates. And I think the unspoken reason is we've never done this before. And just to give it a little bit of context, although he asked me to keep his name out of it at the time, the idea came from a guy who's much smarter than I am about these things. And that is Jack Qualley, who was the staffer for the Board of Estimate for 38 years until he retired in 2019. And he said, look, this isn't going to come along very often, but it's a real opportunity we have here. All it is doing is borrowing basically 2 years worth of borrowing for capital projects before the interest rates go up, and then taking some of the cash the city collects for utility, through utility bills for projects, and shifting that an equivalent amount to replace what was moved forward. So you have the same amount of funding over the next couple of years. You would issue you would be able to do the same amount of work, but you would get the money borrowed before the interest rates went up, and then you would also have the additional interest earnings on the savings that you were pushing back a year on the retained utility fees that we all pay for water and sewer and so on. And this only works where there's a relatively static amount of work being done each year, and the utility area is where that is. They spend, roughly $12 million a year on X and $10 million on, let's say, relining sewers. And so that's fairly predictable.
So your predecessor on the BET, Carol Becker, there was once an issue where the city was going to borrow money for Target Center. And They're going to refinance. That was the issue. Like interest rates were lower. Let's save the city some money by refinancing. And like she went on TV and like grandstanded about how it's a giveaway to a sports team owner when it was just about refinancing existing debt to save money, like a similar thing to what you were trying to do. And so I guess that's the lead into my question about adding another publicly elected member to the BET. Like Steve, you're good. I trust you. You're smart. You're not proposing anything out of this world. You're not grandstanding. But like, I am worried. You guys on the BET, you're not paid very much. Hardly anyone wants to run for that, Steve. You're the only one who wants this job. Fortunately, you're qualified. But my problem with your idea of adding another publicly elected member, you have no idea who that's going to be. Nobody's going to know their name. I'd much rather be a group of council members and the mayor. As far as I'm concerned, abolish the BET. sorry to get extreme on you, but so can you explain like why you think it's a good idea to add another publicly elected member?
Sure. First of all, we're the only body in Minneapolis, elected body in Minneapolis, that doesn't have an odd number of members to break ties. And I think that's fundamental to basically operating as a public body. If we'd had an odd number of members, we might have been able to, for example, do that money-saving transfer that we just talked about in the face of rising interest rates. I think that beyond that, your fear is who will get on the BET. I don't think we've had a history of, for lack of a better term, yahoos getting on the BET.
Wait, I just mentioned Carol Becker, Steve.
Yeah.
You're telling me we haven't had a history of yahoos?
She was much different when she was first elected. Let's put it that way. And she had a background as a city budget analyst. I'll give her credit for that. I would say that if this were approved, and that's by no means a given, it would be incumbent on the two members who are sitting now to go out and recruit somebody with the skills. And there are a few people around town who maybe even have worked for the city of Minneapolis in a finance capacity. And I'd love to see somebody like that run for the board. I don't know if they would, because they haven't done the political thing before. They're used to being administrative, but I think it's possible. Look at the last election. You will recall that there was a very capable candidate who ran, and you endorsed her, and she was probably the best qualified of all of us, and the DFL endorsed her. I didn't get endorsed, nor did the third person who sought the endorsement. She had to withdraw because of a change in jobs, but she would have made a bang-up member of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. I would say that either of the person who didn't get the endorsement along with me also had a decent background in as basically somebody who'd worked in finance, be it at a store corporate level. And then we had a couple people who, to my mind, and that's just my opinion, probably weren't qualified and did get on the ballot, but the voters looked at their credentials and basically said, Steve and Samantha sound better than these two, and so we're going with them. So I think somebody could run, but that doesn't mean they'll get elected, and I think it's incumbent on those of us who are on the board to, if there were a third publicly elected member approved, and that's a long and torturous path, we should be out there recruiting.
I think it's very easy to slip into a situation where you stop paying attention to the BET. You're like, oh, Steve's there. It's fine. Steve's there. And then a couple of years from now, Steve is not there. Steve went away. Steve decided he had better things to do. And then you have three random people for 3 seats, not getting a lot of scrutiny. And they're not looking out for things. Like, they're not willing to let the city refinance debt on a sports stadium because they want to grandstand about how it's a giveaway to a sports billionaire when it's existing debt and it would save the city money. I just feel like it's very dangerous. And again, abolish the BET. Let's let the city council and the mayor decide these things?
Well, John, the city council did try that, and the then mayor Ryback, and the voters said no.
Right.
So we got to live with what we have, and I'm glad we do it. I think it's important to have an independent perspective on the mayor's budget and the mayor's proposed levy, and that's what I try to do. That's why I ask questions, a lot of questions, interminable questions when finance folks come before the board. And in terms of going away, John, if I get reelected, this is my last term.
You're pledging.
I don't want to serve on the board in my 80s.
So why come back? You said you did some soul searching about why come back. So first question is, like, what are the reasons not to come back? Like, what worried you about coming back? Like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore.
Well, the first time, John, I did a campaign, it was exciting, and I sort of made it up as I went along. Now I know what it involves, and it's work. It's work. And I've been spending several hours a day just laying the groundwork. But the main reason, I have grandkids, I have friends, and I'd like to spend time with them. But it seemed to me that one term is sort of walking away too soon. And I've built up a certain amount of expertise. The other reason is that we have approved hiring a staff member, full-time staff member, for the first time since 2019. And there's a long history of why that decision to go part-time it was not a good idea. But I want to be in a position, I was just reelected president of the board, to mentor that new employee through the process of coming on board and getting to know people around City Hall and giving them a good list of research projects.
So I've got a tax hawk question. So I'm going to quote you from your announcement that you're running for re-election. And you said, I feel that there are some areas of city spending that could be trimmed or eliminated, but BET members don't have that power. But, and here's my question. Mm-hmm. Isn't it a legitimate tactic for you to set the levy at a lower amount and say, I don't know what you're going to cut, but I think you should, and I'm limiting you and I'm forcing you to make hard choices by setting the levy lower? Even though it's not your job to cut spending, you could force the issue. Mm-hmm.
You're right. It is a legitimate tactic, and I considered that this time. I did propose that in 2022, I believe, for 2023. And it didn't pass. And so this time I was sitting there thinking, this is a very big increase, and what's projected for next year in property taxes is even bigger. I could bring forward the smaller levy amendment, and I was tempted to do that, but I sat down with the mayor before he even proposed his budget when it was getting toward the end stages, and I told him, look, I've been looking at the budget, and it seems like here are some things you could do to reduce spending. For example, shift more money from the Downtown Assets Fund to the general fund. That's what's funded from the various sales and special taxes. Or you could use some additional money from the city's budget reserve. I suggested even some areas potentially for cuts in spending. And he took some of those ideas in his budget. And he called me, the 8.1% he proposed is obviously high by historic standards, although not in years where the tax base is growing. This is a year where it's not, and that's where the pain is coming from. But he took some of my ideas, and so I also had conversations with both the Budget Committee Chair, Aisha Chutai, and Elliot Payne, the council president, who sit as colleagues on the board. And I knew that they were looking at a lower levy increase. And so knowing that, I told the mayor, look, if you're willing to do a serious and sustained look at studying alternative ways of funding the city budget increases through non-property tax revenue and take those to the legislature, I will vote for your budget. And so that's what I did. So I've done it in the past. It didn't pass. I'd be willing to do it again, particularly next year if there's not enough progress on those non-property tax revenues. I'd be willing to offer a lower figure.
What did you think about the way that turned out with the council setting the levy lower? Felt like a little politics there. We want to be seen as the ones cutting taxes, and the mayor came back during a council meeting and was like, "Oh no, I want to cut it even further. I want to cut the levy some more under that." What did you think of how that played out?
Well, I'm glad, first of all, that both made cuts because I thought there were areas within the budget that could have been cut. I'm glad that we ended up with a lower figure. However, I was not happy with how the council went about it. I think that earmarking money for, and this is again the side of things that the Board of Estimate doesn't control, which is how the money is spent, but earmarking money for certain areas of the city, for example, for policing, or awarding contracts to specific organizations without a competitive process. To me, that's not optimal government. And so I was disappointed by that. But once we set the levy, it's out of my hands, except as a cheerleader or somebody jeering from the stands.
We're getting far afield from the BET, but what do you think of the council's argument that, well, we have to do this because there are lines of communication with the mayor, the relationship just isn't there, the trust isn't there, so we're going to earmark things. We're going to say where this money should be spent because we don't trust that the mayor is taking us seriously, is not working with us, not addressing the concerns of our constituents. So we're going to say the money has to go here.
I think that, for example, in some of the specific contracts that were awarded, I think you could earmark the money for the particular purpose, but mandate that there be a competitive process to spend it, to pick the entity that would spend the money. I agree that the lines of communication are not good from everything I read and hear. My take on that, as an outsider, I'm really not a City Hall insider, despite the fact that I have this Board of Estimate seat. I'm not up on all the gossip. But I think that whenever there's a lack of communication, it's a two-way matter. Just as, for example, when Governor Walz and Mayor Fry fumbled the calling out of the National Guard. I think that was a two-part issue. I think both sides are somewhat to blame. And so, communication is something that can be fixed if people on both sides have a willingness to do that. And if not, you make the case for changing at the council or changing at the mayor's office.
So how long did you spend as a reporter, Steve?
Oh, my goodness. If you want to go back to my first paid job, it was at the Minnesota Daily. And then I worked 4 years there, 7 years at small papers, and then 40 years at the Star Tribune.
That's a long time. Have you learned anything? You mentioned you're not a City Hall insider, but it's a perspective shift. You're now kind of on the inside now. So what have you learned? I don't think I've talked to you in this format since you've been elected. What are you learning from that perspective shift?
One thing is that it's a lot easier being on the outside of the open meeting law and the Data Practices Act than it is on the inside, where you have to be careful not to do certain things. I also came out of a milieu in a newsroom where a typical turnaround was a day, maybe a week on a story, and you are used to collecting information, assembling it, and then slamming it into print. And in government, it doesn't work that way. And it took me a few months to realize that I had to slow down, and I had to bring people along, and I had to wait for the bureaucracy at times to do what it's supposed to do, which is advise us on the technicalities. And so it was definitely a shift in culture for me.
Who is requesting your data? Are you just talking about data practices trainings that you've been to? Is anybody requesting your data?
No, not that I know of.
Does it make you feel unloved that no one is doing data requests for Steve's data?
I think it probably fits with the low profile of the Board of Estimate. I don't take it one way or another.
Okay. I feel like I've come to the end here. Is there anything about you running for reelection or topics that we have not gotten to?
Well, I'd just like to talk about maybe just a little bit about the process of, again, pursuing this larger Board of Estimate with a third public member. We asked the Charter Commission to take a look at it. The Charter Commission held a meeting of the requisite committee, and they pretty quickly shot. Well, you were there. They shot it down very quickly.
Right. Yeah,
And,
I'm on Barry Clegg's side. It's me and Clegg like this on this charter amendment.
Okay. Well, I think that had more to do with the with the Charter Commission going along with the effort to abolish the Board of Estimate back in 2009 and getting shot down and sort of having their nose out of joint. And I thought we presented good arguments. So the next move is to ask the City Council to consider it, and the City Council could unanimously approve a charter change on a 13-0 vote. I don't think that's very likely. The other door for them to enter is to ask the Charter Commission just what we asked them. But the difference is, even if the Charter Commission comes back and says, no, we don't think this is a good idea, the City Council can substitute its own judgment and put the original proposal on the ballot or a modified proposal. And then the third door we could go down if we need to, and this would probably be a 2026 matter. It would be a petition campaign to put it on the ballot, which is a lot of work.
Yeah. It makes me feel weird to be on the same side as Barry Clegg and Peter Ginder and that whole crew.
I've known each of them for years, and they're good people.
Okay. I'll take your word for that. Do you have any recommendations? What are you up to that you're enjoying? You got any new hobbies, entertainment, books, or movies? What do you like to do that you think other people should take up?
Well, one of the things I spend a lot of time on is that one morning a week I go out to Coldwater Spring, just south of Minnehaha Park, and lead a crew that deals with non-native vegetation and tries to restore the site to something like it was in 1840. We can always use more volunteers. That's through the National Park Service. I do the same thing occasionally at Lake Harriet. I serve on the Great Northern Greenway, which advocacy group, which is trying to finish a east-west link from Worth Park to essentially the Quarry Shopping Center for pedestrians and cyclists. We're behind that bridge that has gotten a little bit of publicity that would cross the Mississippi and be a pedestrian bicycle-only bridge and a place where people could hang out and fish, observe the river. We do that only because the railroad won't play ball with us. Being the fourth branch of government, they are answerable to no local government. And movies, heck, I love to go to movies. I just saw Conclave. I'm going to see The Brutalist tomorrow. I read James a few months ago. I'm reading a book right now about called They Shall Not Be Moved, or words to that effect, about the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe because I'm trying to research some family history. And and then there's grandkids.
How much do you get paid for the BET, Steve? What's the pay?
I couldn't tell you exactly, but it was raised to $4,000 per year in 2022 when we came on the board, and it increases with the rate of inflation each year. And because I have it deposited directly into my Roth IRA, I couldn't tell you the precise figure, but it's somewhere between $4,000 and $4,500 right now.
It's so small that Steve doesn't even notice. So
You're
not right. You're not doing this for the money. And running for reelection is a job on top of your already not very well paid job. So thank you for your service, Steve Brandt.
Thank you.
This has been the Wedge Life Podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.